Good morning. Today we're here with Carrie Thompson from the Knox County Health Department. Carrie is a public health educator, and we're going to talk about the subject of e-cigarettes and vaping. Thank you so much for being here today, Carrie.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. First off, how long have you been with the Knox County Health Department?
I've been at the Knox County Health Department in this position for 5.5 years.
Wow. So what do you do in your job?
So most of my job is focused on 3 areas. One being secondhand smoke reduction in infants and youth. The second being youth prevention. And we focus on youth prevention in terms of traditional cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, and then what we're here to talk about today, vaping. And my third area of focus is our Knox County Youth Health Board, and it's all of public health for high school students in the area.
Wow, that's a great job. What are some of the big issues that you see facing our teens today?
I think teens today are faced with multiple issues, but I'd like to point out that in my opinion, I think the biggest issue that they face has to do with the root cause behind making positive choices. And I think part of the reason why some youth choose to engage in behavior that's negatively impacting their health is due to self-esteem, due to anxiety issues, due to anything regarding mental health and feeling good in oneself and feeling good about the choices that they make and how the choices they make can have a negative impact on themselves and others. Other issues that I think they face that weren't faced years ago is social media. I think being in the digital age really heightens the level of potential peer pressure. It heightens the level of misinformation, and it heightens the level of students feeling like they need to meet a certain cool factor. And I think mental health and the impact of the digital age on that is the biggest issue facing youth today. But as I'm here to talk about today, vaping is one of the issues that's under the surface of the larger umbrella of mental health.
Okay, thank you. How big of a problem are e-cigarettes, vaping, juuling in today's world? And can you give us a little bit about what's the difference in vaping, juuling, e-cigarettes? How does that all work together?
Sure, I think it's a huge issue. So just in the 5.5 years that I've worked for the health department, when I first started out, most of our focus was on traditional cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. And over time, probably about 2.5 years ago, our focus changed to e-cigarettes. The introduction of Juul and other pod-based e-cigarettes really astronomically increased the use among youth. And 2015 is when Juul came out, but a huge issue. Unfortunately, the rise in youth using these products has increased dramatically and statistically significantly across the U.S., across the state of Tennessee, and also here in Knox County.
Wow, now is that because the pods are just easier to hide?
They are smaller. So you asked about what is the difference between e-cigarettes, vaping, juuling, etc. It's the way they look and the way that they specifically go into the lungs. But when push comes to shove, it's the same foreign substance going into the lungs directly. And even though they vary in looks, even though they vary in how they're used, whether they're intended to be refilled or whether they're intended to be discarded, it's a similar juices. I do want to, and I believe you have a question here in a little bit about the difference between traditional cigarettes and e-cigarettes and Juul, and I can talk more about specifically the different products that are on the market, but I'll leave that for the later question.
All right. Are you seeing these items being introduced at earlier ages?
Absolutely. So in the last 2 years, one of the programs that we've looked at is what's called Catch My Breath. So 3 years ago, I was part of a pilot study who implemented the program to middle schoolers. And they created then from that pilot a curriculum for 6th, 7th, 8th, and then high schoolers. And 12 months ago, we had the coordinator for this program come in, and they've developed a 5th grade curriculum. They see it in the elementary schools, unfortunately. So it seems that each year, the prevalence of using these products goes lower and lower in terms of age.
What are the Juul pods actually filled with?
Okay, so a Juul pod has got nicotine, first and foremost. It's got propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, so that is what's called a carrier oil. When you talk about misinformation, one of those is that these products are just water vapor. Absolutely not the case. Scientifically speaking, you cannot vape water vapor. There needs to be a carrier oil to be able to heat the coils high enough to produce we call an aerosol. So it's got propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin. It has some additives and flavorings depending on the type of Juul that you get. And then some extracts, it really depends on, specifically with Juul, they have the menthol flavor, they have the traditional tobacco flavor, they have the mango flavor and the cucumber flavor. Those were pulled from the market, the 2 flavors. But for the most part, it's the nicotine, the propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, and then the extracts and flavorings.
So something to make it appealing and taste good.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And what is the age for vaping? I mean, how would a 5th grader get these materials?
A variety of different ways. So one way that they could obtain them is from someone else. So they're borrowing it. The YRBS, which is used for Knox County schools-based institutions, determined that back in 2017, the easiest way or the most prevalent way in which a student obtained one of these products was through borrowing it from someone else. So as of right now, even though there's some regulation going in place at the federal level in terms of age to buy these products, right now it's 18 or over. So an 18-year-old, which last time I believe 250,000 across the state of Tennessee, 18-year-olds who are still in high school. So currently those students have the ability to purchase these products. And with that ability, unfortunately, there has been created a black market for these products where an 18-year-old can bring one to school and sell it to a younger person to have during lunch break for $5. To have it in the bathroom for 10 minutes for $1. And unfortunately, they're getting a hold of these products from older individuals. Or they're going online and checking the box that they are of age, using a Visa gift card that Grandma got them for Christmas, and obtaining these products via that way. Sometimes they go into purchase illegally. So we're really focusing on point of sale, making sure that tobacco retailers who sell vaping products know that these cannot be sold to folks under the age of 18 and in the future under the age of 21.
Okay. How do e-cigarettes compare in terms of nicotine with traditional cigarettes?
Okay, so it does vary depending on the product. So can I go ahead and talk a little bit about
Please.
the different generations of
Yes.
e-cigarettes? When they first came to the United States, around 2010, they were in Asia. You know, there's science back over 50 years ago with e-cigarettes, but in terms of popularity, really didn't hit the U.S. Market until around 2010. First generation of e-cigarettes looked very similar to a traditional cigarette. They were disposable. You got about 200 puffs out of them, and then you threw them away, and you'd buy another one. Then the second generation came out. The second generation was refillable and rechargeable. So the second generation, you would charge via outlet and then buy an e-juice and refill it. Both of those heat up very similar, have an atomizer in them that have a coil that you then inhale once it's heated up to be an aerosol. The third generation is more of what's called mods and tanks. So the mods and the tanks are the really large devices that you see. They're in different, can look like grenades, they can look like cell phones. They are very large. They're the ones that you're gonna, as you're going down the interstate, the big plumes of aerosol that come out of someone's car typically means they're smoking a mod or a tank. Those are refillable. Then really the fourth and fifth generation, the most recent generations, are gonna be the pod-based. Pod-based or Juul. Juul's the most popular product by far in terms of the pod-based system. The pod-based means that you buy a starter set, and then you refill based on your cartridges, the pods. Juul's the most popular, and then there's another product called Swarin. Swarin looks like a teardrop shape. It's very thin, but it's also quite a bit bigger than a Juul, and therefore researchers, they're thinking that Juul will maintain the highest level of popularity because of its ability to be concealed by youth, whereas the Swarin is thin, but it's also not large enough for you to hide in the palm of your hand. And back to your original question in terms of nicotine content compared to traditional cigarettes. All but Juul, so the pods, the tanks, the mods, mods, the tanks, the traditional e-cigarettes, are going to be similar in terms of nicotine content. It's between 0 and 36 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter, whereas the Juul is 59. Juul branded is 59 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter. One pack of cigarettes, so that's 20 traditional cigarettes, is about equivalent to one pod. So one pack of cigarettes is between 59 and 60 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter. Depending on the brand, it does vary, but on average, one Juul pod is the same as 20 traditional cigarettes. So super high level of nicotine as compared to the mods and the tanks in the first generation. And I won't get too sciencey on you today, but it has to do with the way the nicotine is processed in the manufacturer. So there's what's called free-base nicotine, which is what you see in a traditional cigarette. It's what you see in the mods and the tanks. Back in the 1960s, traditional cigarette makers added ammonia to their ingredient list to increase the nicotine content up to about, the 59 for 20 cigarettes. Whereas the Juul uses what's called a salt-based nicotine. They pulled the ammonia out, and they added, an ingredient, that I left off, is benzoic acid. That is in a Juul pod. So when they added benzoic acid, it changed the chemical makeup of the Juul to increase the nicotine content without creating what's called a throat hit that's so harsh that they couldn't use the product. So mods and tanks, they tried to increase the nicotine content, and it made it to where they couldn't use the device because it hit the throat too hard. Whereas when they added the benzoic acid, they were able to skyrocket that nicotine content. I've seen Juul knockoffs upwards of 75 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter. So extremely high levels of nicotine, especially when you think about the fact that one Juul pod is an entire pack of cigarettes in terms of nicotine.
How are the pods sold? Are those like in large packs
Typically
with lots
3
of
packs.
pods? Okay.
Now there's a black market, as I've mentioned, that you can get pods individually. But typically in the starter set, you have 2 pods, and then you can buy a pack of 3 online and anywhere tobacco is sold, and in vape shops.
The starter set.
Yeah.
I hate the sound of that. I saw a vape place, and it said beginning to advanced vapors, and I thought, wow, I guess a beginning vapor would be coming in to get a starter set, and off they would go. So I think the point that you made, catching it at the point of sale, and the education process is so key in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it alarms me when you talk about beginning vapors, because the FDA does not consider any vaping product a cessation device. It is not FDA approved to help traditional smokers quit. What happens is statistically speaking, you're going to see what's called dual use, where someone tries to stop smoking traditional cigarettes, picks up a vaping product, and ends up doing both. So no matter, it may help somebody get off traditional cigarettes, but it's not FDA approved to do so, and it's still nicotine. And it's not regulated like a nicotine patch would. Nicotine patches deliver nicotine, but in a gradual step down to where you're off completely any type of nicotine. So it's important to note that too.
Yes. What is it that's causing these vape-related illnesses that we're hearing about in the news recently?
So the CDC in the last month have determined that most of these illnesses are caused by vitamin E acetate. And the vitamin E acetate is found in some THC containing vapes. But it's really important to know that not all of these illnesses are caused by that. I get reports weekly from the CDC, and some of them are illnesses from individuals who indicate that they're using only nicotine-based products. Also important to know that THC is not my wheelhouse. That's not my expertise. But I research enough and have enough knowledge, because when we talk about these pod-based systems, unfortunately, they're not used as instructed. And any device, pod-based or otherwise, can be hacked. And that means you can get into the pod, you can fill it with some liquid that you got from somebody off the street, some liquid that you got from somebody you know at school. But that person may have gotten it from somebody else, from somebody else, from somebody else, and who knows what's in that product. It could be THC, it could be potpourri. I had an intern up in DC who had someone hospitalized for vaping potpourri. So anything that can be heated up to a liquid can be aerosol, can be vaped. So there's so many unknowns with what you're getting. You don't know if you're getting just that pod. And in and of itself, it's not good for you. But you may be getting something that's been put into it. You may have gotten one that you've seen, I've seen or heard about, the ends of Q-tips being put into a pod to be able to put more liquid in, because the liquid is absorbed by the Q-tip, so you can make it more concentrated. So there's so much, so many dangers associated with all of the devices, not just the ones that you refill, the ones that are intended to be disposed of in the cartridge form. Important to know.
Whew.
Hate to be a downer, just trying to spread
Well,
truth.
thank you. I mean, this is very helpful, and I'm sure it will be helpful to our students and parents. How much research has actually been done on the long-term effects of vaping, and why are these things especially harmful to young people?
Not much in terms of long-term studies, for the fact of the matter that they haven't been out long enough. As I've said, scientists 50 plus years ago had some information about e-cigarettes, but in terms of enough use to be able to study them long term, we don't have that. 2010-ish is when they came to the US. 2015 is when Juul first started, and it skyrocketed. We're talking less than 20% of the entire e-cigarette market back in 2016, all the way up in 2019, May of 2019. 75% of the entire e-cigarette market was ruled by Juul. And when we look at this tracking, and we see years ago with traditional cigarettes, is scary. Because when cigarettes first came out, Santa Claus was promoting cigarettes. You had your doctor prescribing you the latest and greatest cigarette. You had soldiers going overseas who were sent cigarettes in their rations, coming back addicted to nicotine. No one knew the impact that it had on them until they were able to get some studies done. And in 1969, the Surgeon General came out with a report, just as we see in traditional, we have Surgeon General's reports. We had a report come out in late 1960s showing the direct link between lung cancer and cigarette use. And when you look at a graph from the 1969 report, the tracking, it plummets in terms of use for traditional cigarettes. But up until that time, it was just going higher and higher because no one knew. As soon as they knew, they sounded the alarms, but unfortunately, big tobacco had a hold of so many individuals. And so many individuals had become addicted. And you talk about what's so harmful for young people. 90% of all tobacco users start before the age of 18. 98% of all tobacco users start before the age of 26. Nicotine is one of the most addictive substances on this planet. Someone can become addicted to nicotine from one puff, or it might take them several times of using a product. It really depends on the chemistry of that person, the susceptibility to addiction. But you don't know. You can't like put in a card and see, oh yeah, I'm going to be the ones that become addicted quick. You don't know. You're taking that risk. But on top of that, the prefrontal cortex of our brain doesn't finish developing until about 25 for males, 24 for females, 25 for males. And before that finishes developing, becoming addicted to nicotine prior to that finishing of the brain development can do some long-lasting, long-term negative impacts to that brain. When you use a nicotine-containing product, you create what's called nicotine receptors in the brain. So you've essentially hijacked the feel-good serotonin receptors in your brain. So you create nicotine receptors, like an ice cream cone. Think of it like that. Nicotine receptors in the brain, you have that ice cream cone. And within 2 hours of putting that nicotine-containing product down, the ice cream's melted, and your body craves more of them. And the younger you start using, especially before the age of 25, the more receptors you have created upon that addiction, and the harder it is for that to be reversed. So you may be doing long-term damage, and you may be suffering consequences of an addiction that you never intended. I've never talked to a tobacco user who said, I'm so glad I took that first puff. I'm so glad I put that dip in my mouth. Never. They don't realize the chains that nicotine can create because it's so addicting. It's absolutely possible to quit, but extremely difficult when you start using before the age of 25, and especially if you start using before the age of 18. That prefrontal cortex in terms of brain development, that's where you get some wisdom. That's where you get less risk. That's why you see even college students, you haven't fully developed I'm going to really think about the consequences of this decision before I make it. And so you not only have a susceptibility to picking up that product, but once you pick it up, those chains are awfully harder, much harder to break than if you would have done it later in life, which you're talking about less than 2% of all society doing it after the age of 26.
Wow. Oh, that is great information and scary.
Absolutely.
Speaking of it is absolutely possible to quit, what resources are available for someone trying to quit?
So one of the best resources that I've seen that's evidence-based is the Truth Initiative. So I don't know if anybody watching has seen the Truth Initiative commercials that they do, but the Truth Initiative is anti-vaping, anti-tobacco, especially related to youth. And they have a great mobile-based service. Students can text Ditch Juul to a number and get free cessation counseling. So please go to Truth Initiative's website for specifics on that. But not only can students get cessation support, parents and other loved ones can get support through a number that they can call as well. So Truth Initiative is one program, and This Is Quitting is the program by the Truth Initiative.
Okay.
If an individual is 13 or over, they can call the Tennessee Tobacco Quit Line. It's essentially free phone counseling, and they're well versed on the psychological components of nicotine addiction and can help students and any other individual who wants to quit using these products. And it's important to note that both these programs are absolutely free. At the health department, I can provide resources as well to be able to get folks put in the right direction in terms of quitting. And know that it's absolutely possible. Know that on average it takes between 7 and 10 times for someone to successfully put down a nicotine containing product for good. So just because you've tried to quit before doesn't mean it's never going to happen if you weren't successful the first time.
Okay, so keep trying.
Absolutely, yes, especially as a young person, because when you talk about cessation support for young people, it's a little different because you've got that brain development, you've got the addiction being really strong, and you've got, you know, the issues we've talked about teens facing today. So you've got a lot at play when you talk about services for young people to stop. Absolutely worth it and absolutely possible, though.
Good, thank you. What can parents do to help educate their kids about the dangers of e-cigarettes?
I think it's important to take an approach of open dialogue, open communication. The more, in my opinion, the more that parents try to just lay down the hammer and accuse and search backpacks, the more likely, and again it has to do with that brain development and the risk and reward and consequences, the more likely potentially that student is to do the opposite, to really, to then be better at hiding it, to then not talk about other things. And when you ask me about what teens are facing these days, I think it goes back to the anxiety, the stress put on them, the mental health side. And so creating an open dialogue. So say you watch the news after dinner every night and they're talking about another vaping related illness. Bring it up. What do you think about vaping? Have you seen any of your classmates do it? What do you think the dangers are? Having just a casual, open-ended conversation about it is important. And then it creates an opportunity, even prior to that, just talking to your child, talking to your the person under your care, you know, the person you're caring for, to be able to have them trust you enough to come to you. Because unfortunately, some of these teens don't realize just how addictive nicotine is, and they want help, and no one's offering help. So having that trust with a parent or some other loved one to be able to say, hey, look, I'm messed up. I've started this and I can't stop and I need help. Being able to be that trusted person in their life to be able to get them the help that they need, I think is important. So not only having the casual open dialogue about it is important, but being aware of the signs and symptoms, increased irritability, and that goes back to the nicotine addiction withdrawals. Increase in irritability, lack of impulse control. When you're using nicotine and you have the receptors in the brain, it negatively impacts that prefrontal cortex, even more so as it's developing. So you're going to see the lack of impulse control, potentially impacting grades because they have a lack of concentration. You may see an increased interest in perfumes and other things to try to mask the scent. You may see them trying to hide products. And this goes to another point, knowing what they look like. Anybody can Google these. A Juul looks very similar to a USB drive. Swarren looks really close to one of those liquids you can put in water to flavor it. So very triangular shaped, but it's thin. It's very soft. Some of a nickname has been a woolly pet with students for this product, but it's very soft and kind of squishy. So Swarren, knowing what that looks like, just being aware, and not taking an approach again of searching their backpack every day, but having that open dialogue, I think is important. Knowing what they look like, researching. The CDC is a great resource. The CDC has some tips for parents. So does the American Lung Association. Both of them have some great handouts that parents can go online and look at and see what questions to ask, see what they need to look out for. I think it's just being an informed, not only consumer, but an informed parent and being aware of what's going on and not panicking, but staying calm and being aware.
So within the school, what role might teachers play in discouraging this with their students or supporting their students through trying to quit or find help?
I think a similar approach to parents, being that trusted person in the school system, being someone who, I think there's so much, one of the focuses is with pregnant women who smoke. There's so much judgment there. There's so much, they don't need that. They know they shouldn't do it. That student in the back of their minds knows that this is not good, putting something foreign directly into the lungs. So being a trusted source, but at the same time educating. having a handout, having just a little blurb about it, having something like this great interview to be able to share resources, and being aware. Unfortunately, I've been in this 5.5 years, not as much with vaping because it's relatively new to the market. But if someone in the back of this room was vaping, I might not be able to know. Because there's unfortunately techniques, there's clothing, there's ways in which it's concealed very, very well. And looking at some of those strategies, I think would benefit teachers just to know. I think is important. And making it known that these products are not safe at all for youth. And again, being that trusted source to be able to give them help and provide resources for them.
Thank you. This has been really super informative, and we thank you for the signs that you made for us so we can put them around campus to remind people, and maybe they'll think twice about, oops, this is an anti-vaping, anti-tobacco campus.
Right.
And we really do want to help, so I would also recommend that our students could come to me as a resource for connecting to additional resources if they are trying to quit or worried about getting pulled into this habit.
Absolutely. If they have peers and other classmates that they'd like to share resources with that they could get, I think that'd be awesome. And just creating a culture in which this isn't acceptable. And
yes.
It's not acceptable, but some of these students need help. I think is important, and instead of just shoving them away, being able to provide resources is great. And I'm really encouraged to see that you all have the signage and the opportunity to help students and also to educate, so that there won't be a need to help them because they'll choose to not be another nicotine addicted individual.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm
thank
happy
you
to be
so
here.
much
Absolutely.
for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.